Hello, my friends. My name is Donald Lee, and you're listening to Expressing and Revealing Your Truth with Donald Lee. It's a podcast about your spiritual growth, about learning who you really are, the beautiful and eternal soul that you are. You are not a body. You are not even a mind. You are a soul, and you have a body and a mind. You are a child of God, an eternal being of light and love, created in the image and likeness of our Father, who is light. If you sometimes wonder about all these sorts of things, what I call spiritual reality, then this podcast is for you. If you're trying to understand more about spiritual reality, then this podcast is for you. If you're interested in the dramatic and transformational spiritual experiences that some people have, then this podcast is definitely for you. Even if you think that all the spiritual stuff is BS, then maybe the experiences of other people is what you need to hear about in order to open your mind to a greater reality than you currently recognize. On this podcast, I interview people who have had transformational spiritual experiences that awaken them to a greater understanding of reality, to the realization that there is a spiritual reality as well as a material reality. But on this first episode, I won't have any guests. This is my chance to introduce you to me and my podcast. So, let me first tell you a little bit about myself. I'm a Canadian from Alberta, from what used to be a small town, ironically called Fort Saskatchewan, Alberta. And when I was going through school, junior and senior high school, I got involved in our school band program and I got really turned on to music. So much so that I wanted to become a musician. That's what I had my heart set on. And all the way through junior and senior high school, my principal instrument was clarinet, but I also learned to play saxophone and flute and a little bit of the other stuff that you need to know. So when I graduated from high school, I went off to university, the University of Toronto, actually, in a music performance program. But after about a year or so in that program, I began to realize that I might be able to make a career in music and still not a living. One time, years ago, a friend of mine said to me, "Hey, Don, how are a musician and a large pizza the same?" I said, "I don't know." He said, "Both can almost feed a family of 4. That's about what it's like to be a professional musician. So I ended up dropping out of music, dropping out of university, but then I didn't know what to do with my life since I'd spent my whole teenage years with my goal of becoming a musician. And as many young adults do, I tried out many things. I did a bunch of different jobs. And at one point, I needed a job for a few months, to get a little bit of money together so I could go off and do something exciting with my life. So I took a job as a laborer at a local fertilizer manufacturing plant. But this was just temporary. Isn't it funny how sometimes temporary things tend to last for an awful long time? Like the temporary income tax of 1917. At any rate, one thing led to another, and I ended up spending almost 2 decades in the Western Canadian fertilizer industry. And I didn't stay as a laborer for long. I moved over into process operations in our ammonia plant and our utilities plant, got my third-class power engineering ticket, and I later went back to university. I was technically a full-time student at the University of Alberta for 4 years, while I was still working full-time shift work at the plant and trying to be a full-time husband and a full-time father to 4 kids, and as you can imagine, doing badly at everything. But I finally graduated from university in 1990 with a degree in economics. And with that, I managed to stick my foot in the door of the marketing department, and I worked in fertilizer marketing for several years and then later moved over into a marketing role in our fertilizer new products research group. But in 1999, the company had gone through some mergers and acquisitions, and they hadn't achieved the synergies they were expecting. Remember that word, synergies? Yeah, it kind of meant that they wanted to get rid of a lot of people, which is exactly what they wanted to do. And so they announced that they wanted to get rid of at least 500 people, and I ended up being one of them. So I went back to my first love, which is music, of course. I went back to the University of Alberta and I did a second degree in education. And right about the turn of the century, I became a newly minted band director. And then I spent almost 2 decades as a band director and a teacher, mostly in Alberta. But when our last finally graduated from high school, my wife and I went and had a little overseas adventure, and I taught for a few years in Kuwait and a few years in Pakistan. And all of this time, I was on a spiritual quest to learn more about spiritual reality. What is really true about me, about us as humans, about the universe and the nature of reality, etc. All the great existential spiritual questions of life. Actually, I got turned on to this as a young teenager. I was curious about lots of things, as teenagers often are. And funnily enough, I met another student at band camp who introduced me to Edgar Cayce. And I ended up reading quite a few of the Edgar Cayce books during my teenage years. And also, our school band director throughout junior and senior high school was also a Protestant minister. And we often got little mini sermons as part of our band rehearsals. So I learned a wee bit about Protestant Christianity. And I started reading many of the great spiritual books in our world. I read the Bible and the Quran. I read Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse and the Bhagavad Gita. And I got particularly interested in that kind of branch of modern Christianity that has stemmed out of what's often called the science of mind, going back about 150 years. And out of that came the New Thought movement and the Unity churches and those sorts of things. After I married in 1983, I became a Catholic and delved into Catholic history and theology. I've always been particularly enthralled with the famous Christian mystics and channels like St. Teresa of Avila. My own personal spiritual progress has been slow and methodical, based mostly on study and intellectual understanding. And that's not really the best way to go about it at all. I realized that what really convinces people about spiritual understanding is transformational spiritual experiences. For most of us, these are not personal experiences, but the experiences of others that we read about in the Bible or the stories of saints or in similar stories in the sacred scriptures of other religions. But many people don't believe these stories. So the transformational spiritual experiences of people in our own time, people that we can meet and hear from directly, can have a huge impact on our understanding. When I finally retired from being a teacher and a band director, I then set about to become a spiritual author and speaker and now a podcaster. My first book actually was inspired by little incidents that happened during my teaching career. At some point, I started writing down some of these little incidents that we sometimes call teachable moments. When something happens, you're working with the kids and something just kind of develops and comes up and you think, there's a bigger lesson happening right here than the alternate F-sharp fingering on the clarinet that I was trying to teach you. So I started writing some of those little stories down and turning them into modern-day parables. And that's what my first book is. It's called The Band Director's Lessons About Life. And it's made up of 50 little parables. It's a bit like a chicken soup for the soul book. Each parable is about 3 pages long, and each one starts out with a story that happened in school, and then there's a reflection that draws out a spiritual lesson from the events of the story. And I followed that up a little bit later with a little book called The Band Director's Pocket Guide to Spiritual Growth. And it's a short little book that makes it easy to read, easy ideas to follow, 3 simple ideas that can really put your spiritual growth on the fast track, kick it into high gear, so to speak. These are principles that, are kind of buried in almost all the major religions. And so I've kind of pulled them out and given them names that we don't often hear about and made it so that it's easy for anyone to follow this 3-step little process. I've also recently completed and published a study guide to go along with the Book of Parables. It turns the Book of Parables into a year-long course in spiritual development. You spend a week on each of the 50 parables, either in your own individual study or with a group. Works better with a group sometimes, but it can be used as a study guide both individually or for group study. And there's a little bit more instruction on each parable about the meaning and how to apply it in our lives. And there's discussion questions and reflection questions and a meditation for each week. So these are the 3 books in my Band Directors series of books. Also, when the COVID campaign happened, I was driven down the rabbit hole, like so many other people, as they say, to try to figure out what was really going on because nothing made sense anymore. And my 2 books in what I call the Way Forward series help people to understand what's really going on in our world and what we can sensibly do about it. So the first book is called What the Hell is Going On? And the subtitle is The Web of Fraud That is Enslaving Everyone and How We Can Escape to Freedom. And it does touch on roughly a dozen different frauds, and fraud is the right word for it. I explain why that is in the book, that are all working together to control us and turn the whole world into a one-world, totalitarian, controlled government where all of us are slaves. That's what's really going on. And as I say in the introduction, it's not hard to understand. It's hard to believe. And that's what holds most people up. It is literally unbelievable. And then I spent a year traveling, well, not quite a year. 2023, I spent most of that summer traveling across Canada and speaking to various groups, freedom groups and others about ideas from that book, What the Hell's Coming On? What the Hell's Going On, sorry. And as I did that, many people said to me things like, we're tired of talking about the problems, we want to talk about the solutions. And so I put together a book of solutions, and its title is The Way Forward: How to Escape the Totalitarian Control of the New World Order and Heal from its trauma. Because all of us have been traumatized, whether we realize it or not, by the events of recent years. And all of us need to heal. Heal ourselves, heal our relationships, heal our families, heal our communities, and heal our world. So all of these books and more information about them is available on my website, which is linked below in the show notes, and also on my Shopify page, which is also linked below in the show notes. I sincerely hope that you'll enjoy the upcoming interviews on this new podcast, Expressing and Revealing Your Truth with Donald Lee. I think you'll really enjoy the personal stories and the spiritual insights. And of course, if you do, you know the routine. Please like and subscribe. In the meantime, I send you my love and my blessings. God bless you, my friends.